Speaking of centrist, do you think being radical is better than being centrist? Yes. Being centrist is not really a thing, and being radical implies that you believe something strongly enough to advocate for it in disfavorable circumstances, politically speaking, right? Like, I'm a radical, you know? So, I mean, yeah, obviously, you know, there's a bias for that question. Like, obviously, the radical is going to say that being a radical is better than being a centrist. But, like, unironically, even if you compare, like, radicals on the left and radicals on the right to centrist, there's a certain political honesty and political aspiration in the affirmative that is much easier to engage with politics when that's present than when, like, centrists are doing things, and it just feels very hopeless and alienating and feels like gray goop. You know, that's a lot of the radicalism spawned out of the dissatisfaction with how little centrism was doing, because centrism is defined by a lack of active political aspiration. You know, that's what makes it centrism, is that you are centered around the way things are politically right now. You don't want things to change, but things always need to change. You know, it's better to be a radical and be willing to, like, have some crazy vision for society, even if it's wrong, if you believe in it, rather than being a centrist who doesn't really believe in anything. Because that's how you get these, like, very feckless technocrats or people who aspire to technocracy, who aren't even really that good at their jobs to begin with, that are simply interested in quietly running a country into the ground, you know, quietly and slowly, which is the worst kind of death that a country can experience. Because, you know, in a way, one thing I've also noticed is that politics kind of operates like oobleck, like a non-Newtonian liquid, where the harder you push, the harder something pushes back, right? Like, if you, like, with what is it? Well, I just said oobleck, right? You know, that cornstarch stuff. If you strike it, it'll feel like you hit something. But if you very, very slowly put your hand up to it, your hand will sink in. It's kind of like that, but with the decline and changing of society, right? Where centrists are just saying, today I will destroy society, but competently, in a way that makes me feel smarter than everybody else. That's kind of what centrism is. And because they are simply administering a system quietly and letting its existing contradictions fester in the name of having things stay the way they are. That's the big problem with centrism, and why it has never been a good political conviction, or even a real political conviction, I would say. Had a discussion with my mom. She's radical, but thought at first it made more sense for centrists to be better. Slowly but surely, being better than fast and crazy, as she put it. That's a good one. Yeah, if we all recognize, I think everybody can recognize on some level that being a centrist means that you don't want things to change in a general sense, right? If you're not fundamentally changing society, if you're not, you know, being politically active, you don't have a political vision in the affirmative, something that you are building towards, a nation building project, then what's going to happen is that there are, like, the contradictions and flaws in society as it exists now are just going to sharpen and become worse over time. Every society is subject to this. Feudal societies, capitalist societies, slavocratic pre-feudal societies, and socialism will be no different. Socialism, in this respect anyways, socialism will also have flaws. They just won't be the same flaws. There, you know, we will hopefully fix many of the flaws of capitalism in order to actually make it socialism. You know, that's kind of what defines the differences between each systems, is that they've fixed certain flaws and suffer from different ones. And to be a centrist means that you are dedicated to not fixing those flaws, right? It's better to like have a very grand aspiration and want to fix those flaws than to not want to do anything at all, because that's just how societies collapse. That's how you get the Bronze Age collapse or something analogous to it. Because from what we understand actually about the Bronze Age collapse, it could be, you know, it is in many ways a period defined by revolutions, but revolutions in reaction to societies that had been administered in the same fashion for so long that contradictions had sharpened to a completely unsurvivable extent for the governments of the time. You know? Basically, doing nothing does nothing. And there's never a period of time where it's politically appropriate to do nothing. Because there's always shit that needs to happen. You know? And radicals, regardless of their conviction, want to do something. Although there does become a point where like a wrench gets thrown in this, because you do have like modern grifters who like the aesthetics of radicalism, but don't necessarily authentically believe the things that they claim to. I don't know exactly, like, they don't fit super neatly into that juxtaposition there that I offered, but you know, that's kind of that's life, right? I guess they would probably even be more similar to centrists. They would just be, funnily enough, the grifters who pretend at the political identity of the far right or the far left, you know, but reject all avenues of change as like unviable, are the only real radical centrists. They are radically in favor of doing nothing, as opposed to in favor of doing nothing, but with the aesthetics of doing nothing. Does that make sense? I feel like that even might be a good segment, exploring the difference between like centrism and other ideologies, and why I think like centrism almost presents a unique blight that every society has suffered from it. Like every society, in order to spawn their left-wing and right-wing movements, had to suffer from the growing cancer of centrism that was so debilitating and upset the you know, state of society so that they basically became bedridden. You know, if we're using cancer as an analogy. Because it strips societies of their ability or willingness to do anything. Yeah, centrism bad. End of the segment. Thanks for watching, and support the channel if you would be so kind.